Hey, you guys, welcome to Tuesday's show, In the Mind of Frase, all about interviews, experiences, and entrepreneurs. Today, we have an interview with someone who's a good friend of mine, and I also adore him and want him to be more and more on this podcast because I truly believe that in this crazy world where everybody is either super conservative or super liberal, there's a huge population of us, and I know many of you listening and that have followed me for years, who are really moderate. We're real independents, and some things we're conservative on, some things we're liberal on, but it's hard to find someone who can argue that sensibly and not crazy. Okay. So Jeremy Lerman is getting his PhD in economics at George Mason University. And he's here today to talk about college loan debt. Is college even worth it? And you're probably like me. It took me nearly 15 years to pay off college loan debt. It was insane. And that was even with the help of my mom and my father who had passed away. So I'll tell you my story. But we also discussed the college loan bubble. It seems like it is the next housing bubble that's going to burst. So take a listen. I think you'll enjoy today's episode. The college loan debt bubble. Jeremy Lerman is back on the Hey Frase podcast. You are always a treat to have on this podcast. You are getting your PhD in econ. I have you on here because, as you said last time when you were talking about gun violence, you have to read and be able to argue all sides. So you're our shortcut. It's almost like we're playing Super Mario. And remember how you would get like the different like codes so you could skip the lands?
Oh, yeah.
You allow us to skip the research and lands. You do it for us.
Doing the exact opposite of what I am trying to argue, yes.
So that's why I love having you on. But this one was really fascinating, which I wanted to have you discuss further, because college loan debt. And really, a while ago, I ended up paying off college loan debt with the help of my mom. So I want to be full disclosure here. Like, I went to Mount Holyoke, which was a $45,000 a year liberal arts school. And the way I was able to pay for it was when my father passed away, he had an insurance policy that paid for my brother and mine college education. That's what it was supposed to be for. So we could go to these expensive colleges if we wanted. Mm-hmm. But my mom, being the incredibly savvy finance woman she is, I think spent most of the money. So like by the time I went to school, I think she paid for the first year. And then the second year we ended up getting college loans, right? Okay. So, right? I know. Thanks a lot, Mom. And then my brother went to the University of Maine. So his was much cheaper and his was all paid off in like 4 years. So, and then I think he ended up using the extra money. I don't even know why. This was like a bad idea, right? So I end up with these incredibly crazy Sally Mae loans. And for the past, I've been out of college since 2004. So what's that, like 15 years ago? 14 years ago? 13 years ago? 15, 14, 13, whatever it takes, right? Okay. So I graduate and I have been paying $700 a month ever since, right? Finally, my mom ends up selling off a house, ends up paying off the remainder, which was, 60 grand or something like that. But it took me like 15 years to pay these off. And every time that I would tweet about this or share this, people would go nuts because they either are in the same boat, their parents are going to help them, but it's tied to when they pass away or something like that. Or people are in it by themselves and paying these insane college loans. Mm-hmm. So when we were talking, you were saying college loan debt is going to be the next bubble that's going to burst, much like the real estate market did in 2007. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, elaborate. Okay, this is like fascinating to me because I'm like, oh shit, there are so many people with college loan debt. What do you mean?
Yeah, so there definitely is a bubble. There is one important difference though between the college loan bubble and the housing bubble, which is that basically education has become almost entirely taken over, but in terms of like the loan situation and how it's being funded, is almost entirely government controlled. These loans are guaranteed by government, right? So the loans are given directly through government.
Okay, so what does that mean? What does that mean? Like if I get a Sally Mae loan, what do you mean that it's government?
It's guaranteed in the sense that if there's default, the government will back it up. It's sort of like an explicit promise that the
government
person
will bail out these finance houses.
Essentially. In the housing crisis, there was actually an implicit guarantee that it would be the same. So with like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and all these companies, there was an implicit promise, and obviously they ended up doing it with the banks too. And a lot of people thought like it was implicit that because these banks were financing housing, that because this was like a government goal, the government would help bail out these banks in case anything happened. So what this does is it creates a moral hazard. But sorry, going back to what I was saying, the difference is that with the housing market, it was really sort of like still very much a private market. You know, it was banks who were really in charge of the loans, as well as, Fannie and Freddie helping with the financing. Another difference being that the bubble wasn't really foreseen. People thought like, oh, mortgages, these are such safe investments. They could never,
right.
Like people always pay their mortgage. It turned out to be very poor insight. But here, the crisis is very foreseeable. You know, at the peak of the housing crisis, the mortgage default rate on first mortgages was 5.4, might be 5.7%. Okay. At the peak, and for second mortgages, it was something like 4.7.
Okay.
Currently, the current trends are showing that people are defaulting on their college loans between the range of 30 and 35%.
What?
Yeah, and that's
what?
30 and 35%.
Wait a second. Okay, so you're saying at the height of people faulting on their mortgages in 2007, it was only 5.7, so close to 6%. Mm-hmm. And you're saying right now, and we haven't even hit necessarily the height, 30% of people with college loans are defaulting?
Absolutely, yeah.
What?
And
that seems like already it's a huge crisis. How do we not know about this?
So the difference is, and again, this is where I think the bubble's a little different, is, you know, when people default, the government can make up the difference. Because again, it's sort of guaranteed. And by the government, I mean the taxpayers are going to end up paying for this.
Oh my God. Why didn't I should have been defaulting years ago. Like I should have stopped paying. Would that be a wise strategy?
To stop paying?
Yeah.
No. Okay. Don't do that.
Okay. Are you sure?
Because it will still affect you in a very bad way.
Okay.
You know, it'll hurt your credit score.
I'll just never be able to buy a house. Like if I had defaulted, it would be almost impossible for me to like buy a home.
It's still bad for individuals to default. And by the way, these percentages don't even take into account the number of people who defer payment or I can't remember. Deferment.
Oh, the deferment. Yeah, isn't it deferred? Isn't that the only thing you can really do? Because then you put it off. You keep putting it off.
Yeah. So there's deferment, and then there's another one I'm forgetting. It's not coming to me right now. But deferment. A lot of people there's a lot of loan forgiveness.
Okay. I should have gotten
which
all
essentially
these.
means they were not they didn't pay off their debts. And all these other pretty much all these other signs that people are they're not technically defaulting, but they're signs that people are not able to pay off the loans that they've been given. And we're headed more and more in that direction, the direction of sort of loan forgiveness and income-based is another. Income-based payment is another sort of new program that's being favored, and there already is a lot of that, but it's not necessarily on a widespread scale.
So you have people who graduate from college, they have $100,000 in debt, but they're getting a job where they only make $55,000 a year. Essentially, these loaners are saying, okay, based on your income, we'll just accept $200 a month instead of the $700. Is that what that means? Loan-based income, essentially, you were saying?
I actually don't know exactly how it works, to be honest. I'm not like an expert, but I do know that all I know is that the amount that someone has to pay afterwards, the percentage on a monthly basis, is tied to the monthly income that they're making.
So what do you think, when do you think this bubble is going to burst, and what will that look like?
Well, so one other thing I should mention before that is that it's important to keep in mind that this affects people who go to college in very different ways. The variation between the effect on these, or I should say, the variation in the kinds of people who are defaulting is very different. So, for example,
what's an example?
People who go to the most selective colleges, so like the top 10%.
Harvard, Yale,
right? For them,
Penn.
Penn, yeah. I've heard
That's
of it.
Jeremy's alma mater.
Yeah.
Okay.
They are still the returns for them after college are still worth it. In other words, just because they have high debt, their salary more than pays off for it. And
okay.
For them, a college degree is still very valuable.
Okay.
However, for a large population, a large swath of the population who are now attending college, it's not worth it because the value of the degree has diminished. And the reason for that is that essentially the government is providing loans to people who simply, it doesn't matter what like their qualifications are. Anyone who wants to go to college can go to college.
Got it.
And the government will provide loans for those people. The problem is, and this is where the bubble part comes in, and this, sort of the parallel to the housing market. The primary way, or one of the primary ways which government is able to do this, is to provide loans that at very low interest rates. The interest rates are capped.
Okay.
And what this does is it provides the cost. So, an interest rate is just essentially the cost of borrowing, right?
Okay, sure, right. Absolutely.
Normally, the cost of borrowing for the sorts of people who are going to college would be too high, considering the low returns that
right.
they would be getting. And it keep blanking. So this is going to happen. Edit, cut.
I have so many more questions now, too.
Yeah, sorry. What was I saying? The low cost. Oh, so normally they're much lower than the market rate, which is something like double whatever the rates are for loans, and so which indicates that people who are going to college wouldn't otherwise have gone in the first place because they wouldn't have been able to pay that interest rate. What's interesting about this is that these people would have been discouraged from taking on loans in the first place, and so they wouldn't have sort of gone into financial ruin. The other interesting thing is that they're defaulting on their payments even though the market rate that they're paying, even though the loan rate that they're paying is much lower than the market rate.
So even though they're only paying, let's say, a loan that has 1 or 2% interest, I don't even think it gets that low necessarily.
No, it's like something between 6 to 8, I think 6%, maybe 8% or something like that.
Okay, so even though it's that low, they cannot make the payments when they've graduated from a university.
Yeah, and that's actually... And that even applies to like more selective colleges.
I bet, like I went to Mount Holyoke, but I'm imagining a lot of women from Mount Holyoke are, it's insane, the cost. And what's the return?
Right. The return, and the return for those people who go to the selective colleges in the long run is high enough to justify.
Okay.
But sometimes in the short run, they're defaulting because you don't, even if you go to Harvard, you're not necessarily like, you're not a millionaire right out of school. And so payments can be tough. But the real problem is, there are two real problems with, again, like sort of giving money to riskier borrowers, which is what happens when interest rates are very low, because people who who wouldn't otherwise be able to get these funds are getting them. And that is that they end up going to these schools where once they come out of those schools with a Bachelor of Arts or a BA, that they're not, the BA coming from the schools is not as valuable in the market. In other words...
Yes, because everybody has one now.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody's got one. And it's so easy to go. Now you can go to University of Phoenix online.
Exactly.
You can go to community college and get a BA.
Right.
You can go to a Mount Holyoke, which isn't in a top 10, but it's maybe a top 120 schools or whatever.
Right. So even assuming that these people complete their degrees, which, by the way, millions of them do not. Millions don't complete their degrees. In
Right.
fact,
You go for 2 years.
38% of Pell Grant recipients do not complete their degrees.
Wow.
So even if they finish, the jobs that they get do not compensate for the amount that they've spent on the degree. And then there are people, obviously the people who don't finish, who have like made this investment and then they don't even reap the supposed reward of the investment because they don't finish.
And what's the average debt, by the way, now of a college graduate, of just getting a bachelor's degree?
Typically owes between $30,000 and $40,000.
So $30,000 to $40,000 is the average debt for somebody graduating from college. Do you think a college degree now is even worth it? Like, I mean, okay, so would you go to Penn again? Like, would you do that all over?
Well, that's more complicated than the debt. Well, so I, like you, was very lucky in that I actually didn't have to take out loans at all. So my parents completely paid. So would it be worth for me? Yeah.
Hey, look, Big Steve. I mean, that's the way to go.
And so I'm very lucky that way. Is it worth it? The data seems to indicate that for people going to the most selective colleges, yes, it's still worth it. On average, you're earning $1 million more over the course of your life. But is it worth it for other segments of the population? As you go sort of down the scale of selectivity, the answer becomes no. Because A, they're less likely to complete the degree.
Right.
And even if they do, they're not earning the income to justify the amount of loans they're being given. And so, I mean, in the same way that sort of with the financial bubble, because interest rates were kept artificially low, more and more riskier borrowers were given money. And, that what basically happens is by doing so, the government is distorting prices. Okay. They're making something seem cheaper than it actually is according to the underlying conditions of the market, according to scarcity and demand. So what ends up happening is, temporarily it seems as if one can afford to purchase these things, like with the housing market. It's not as if, a lot of people like to say, oh, people were just like, they weren't responsible in the way either that they lent money or spent it. But with the interest rates that were being offered, it made a lot of sense for some of these people to do it.
Right.
Yeah. The issue was that prices were distorted. And so this is a government-made phenomenon. Like, people have to understand that. It's not just like the excesses of markets. The markets have been even more so in education. I mean, there's really not much of a way in the market in education. But with housing, this bubble was created because interest rates were too low, and so riskier and riskier borrowers were able to acquire funds that they otherwise would not have been able to get.
Wow.
And so, what ends up happening is that the people who end up getting hurt when the bubble bursts are the people, most vulnerable.
Right, always.
And it's going to be the same thing all over again with, these sort of like high-risk people who are not equipped to go through college, obviously, as evidenced by the fact that not most of them, but a lot of them are not completing. And even when they do, they're not earning the necessary earnings to be able to justify it.
So when do you think this bubble is going to burst? What's the timeline? And when it does, what's it going to look like for the economy, for the government? Yeah.
So that's kind of a hard question to answer, because unlike with the housing market, there was this asset bubble. And again, that was like a lot of it was sort of like in the private sector or whatever. even though there was a lot of government intervention. Here, it's tough to say because the government has essentially explicitly said, we are not going to let sort of let people if people are defaulting,
they're basically going to forgive the debt, right?
Well, they might forgive the debt, but essentially the point is that the government is going to have to somehow fund the huge gap in between what's being borrowed and what's being paid back. And the only way for them there's two ways for them to do that. One is they get the money through taxes, or they basically inflate money. Either one is not good.
Wow.
And either one's harmful to the economy. But so there won't be a bubble. It won't be a burst in the same way that with the housing market it burst and people defaulted and they had to give up their homes and et cetera,
right.
et cetera. It can't really. This can't really be spread in quite the same way. It'll be spread to the rest of the economy in the sense that people are going to have to pay higher taxes, or the debt might be inflated away, which would be harmful to poor people, especially, and people on fixed incomes, because their money is not as valuable once the dollar is inflated. So, I mean, that'll be the effect, but it won't be as obvious as the housing bubble when banks failed and all those sorts of things, because the government is the institution
right.
that's giving the loans and not banks.
Okay, so you talked about if you get into one of these elite schools, these really top schools, it's still worth it. But what would your advice be to people now? Would you even advise people to get a college degree? Say they're not in a position that you and I are, that they, their parents don't really have any money to help them. I mean, would you even go to college anymore? Because I feel like I don't know if I would even go. And here's the thing. I mean, Mount Holyoke was an amazing education. And I really feel as though, first of all, it gave me great exposure to other people, other women. It forced me to really work hard because I was one of the dumbest people there. I just wanted to be in radio. Everyone else wanted to be a doctor. It was so much work. I was like, oh, this is awful. But it really prepared me in so many ways for the real world of working hard, because I had to work 6 times as hard just to kind of keep up with most of these women who are very, very intelligent. But it's funny, in the broadcast world, I've never been asked for a resume. I don't even have a resume. If you asked me right now I'd be like, holy shit, I got to go to Canva and try to whip one up. I mean, I've never been asked for a resume. And I think to myself, if I had this do over again, I don't know why I'd spend $150,000. You know what I mean? I think it would have been I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah. Cause so there's sort of two issues. One is even if the education you received is not necessary to do the job that you did,
right.
was it necessary to acquire, have access to the opportunities that you had you not gotten the degree?
Yeah, that's true.
There's this idea of there's a lot of credentialism, mm-hmm. Where it's sometimes called up credentialing. Right. I think it's called, where it's not necessarily the content of what you're learning that makes it so valuable. It's actually just having the degree and being able to show that to an employer and signal that you're valuable. And once that becomes the case, then there are incentives for people who want access to better jobs to do that, even if they're not really equipped to get through college. And that's essentially what's happening. But I mean, to answer the question about is it worth it? There's really no way to answer that. In the sense that it depends, because for people like myself, for example, I'm a PhD student. So was it worth it to me? I mean, I wouldn't be able to do a PhD unless I went to college.
Sure.
To be honest, I don't know that college should be a prerequisite, and maybe it's not even technically, although I imagine most PhD programs require a college degree. But maybe you should be able to go just from high school and not spend all that money on a college education, because I kind of agree with you. I don't know that I learned much when I was in college. I mean, I spent a lot of time.
Even at Penn?
Yeah, well, I wasn't a great student in college, which is kind of,
Really?
It's hard. I guess it's hard to believe, but I just wasn't motivated. I didn't find what I was really passionate about. And so it wasn't really until I became a master's student that I became really driven and found what I was, sort of looking for.
How'd your parents like that in college?
My dad gives me shit all the time. I once took a class called, what was it called?
They must have been really happy about them spending their money on that.
Yeah, I took some class on like jazz or something like that, or I don't know, like astronomy, and like, not that astronomy's bullshit, but it's bullshit if you're not like gonna be a scientist
becoming a psychic,
or astronomer.
or what was it?
Yeah.
An astronomist. Oh, I love that. You could be giving readings.
Yeah, I mean, I don't you just take so many classes because it's like, they like make you take these things because they want to like, have you like they want you to have like a holistic, diverse education. But it's just like, was it worth it? I mean, in terms of like what I took away from it, probably not.
Right.
But in terms of it giving me the ability to do what I'm doing now, yeah, it's worth it to me. And I think, so that's why I say it depends. It just depends on, for the people who are really motivated and really like want to just like really, want to get through. They're motivated to learn, essentially. For those people, I think it's worth it. I think for like probably the overwhelming majority of people, college is probably not worth it.
Right.
And the issue is like, how do we get around this credentialism problem? The answer is not to keep funding people who are not equipped to go. That just makes it worse. It dilutes the value of the college degree.
Sure.
And
well, it seems like it's already diluted. To me now, it's like everybody says, "Oh, you have to have a master's." Like all the younger people that intern or whatever, they're like, "Oh, I've got to get my master's." I'm like, "Why? Why the fuck would you be getting a master's?" I mean, no offense to you, but
no, I think you're right. I mean,
like, go to work. I mean, this is like, it's not going to help you.
It's funny now. Even like if you live in DC, even a master's isn't jack shit anymore, because most, like, if you're trying to go into politics, everyone has a master's degree. Now you need to get like a law degree or a PhD. Master's, like everyone has a master's in public policy and public administration. So yeah, there's this.
So people still need it. Really.
Need what? Oh, the undergrad?
Yeah, the undergrad and the master's and the PhD. And, to me, in my world of media and broadcasting, it's so different because, you can have a PhD, but if you can't entertain people, if you can't engage people, if you can't keep them interested, it really doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying? If you're on the broadcasting world. But I'm sure if you're working on Capitol Hill, it's a whole different ballgame. Yeah.
I mean, but I mean, so in a sort of, let's imagine like a fictional world for a second, but like let's say, you needed the master's because you needed like special, let's say you needed some sort of special knowledge in a like, or a field of expertise, for example. So it kind of like makes sense in that sense to get a degree and become like an expert in the thing that you're interested in. But is college necessary for that? Maybe not. I mean, it's like maybe people who are in high school who know what they want to do should just be able to like get a master's and skip college. Because frankly, the evidence suggests that college doesn't really prepare people for either the workforce or for higher education.
It doesn't.
So, I mean, I don't know. It just, again, I'm not saying college isn't worth it. I think that just depends on what you want to do.
You have to really think about it, it sounds like, before you make that leap.
Right. And it's like the same thing with, a lot of people getting like law degrees now because they're like, well, I don't really know what I want to do, so I'll just get a law degree because that'll open doors.
That's like $150,000 on top of $150,000. What?
Yeah, no, it's like insane. And people are doing that less now because they realize everyone else is getting law degrees, and it's not like the market
It's flooded.
Yeah, it's flooded. So less people are doing that now. But yeah, it's the same idea. It's like people are just getting degrees because they think they need degrees.
2 final questions for you. One, do you think we're going to start seeing a lot of college institutions closing over the next 10 years? I mean, it seems like a ton of colleges popped up in the past 20 years to service now all these people that were getting degrees. Do you think you're going to see a mass amount of colleges that aren't the Penns, that aren't the Harvards closing?
I think in the long run, I don't see how that's not going to happen because I just don't think the funding scheme we currently have in place is sustainable. It's not. We can't afford it. The individuals who borrow money can't afford it, and the taxpayers can't afford to pay for it on top of all the other shit, that's wrong, and all the other financial problems we have. So, the student debt alone is $1.4 trillion right now.
Wow.
And that's, on top of all the other stuff. So down the line, I think yes, but the problem is that, the current political mood is that, we need to do more to help these people get to school. And so now it's like, loan forgiveness and deferment plans and income-based blah, blah, blah. And these aren't going to help because, again, the issue isn't just that people are having trouble paying, which they are, but it's also that the degree they're getting for the overwhelming majority of people is not worth the earnings that they end up receiving after they're done. And it sort of undermines what would otherwise be their opportunity to get practical skills in the workforce. Mm-hmm. The people forget that you're forgoing income for 4 years.
Yeah.
And it may not be a lot of income. It might not be a lot of income, but you do get a lot of experience, at least, that makes you sort of more fuck.
It's fine, we're almost done.
That a lot of experience that makes you more marketable for promotions and stuff like that. And I think that, if there were more people not going to college and more people entering the workforce without it, then sort of like people would place value on that. But because everyone's getting degrees, it's like, I'm looking for someone with a degree.
Okay, so final question. You being an economist, what do you think, what do you foresee as jobs as more and more people are going to be defaulting on these student loans? It sounds like college degrees are going to become less and less valuable. So what's the trend that you guys are seeing that you think that people could forego college, enter the workforce, and still make a great living like they did when our grandparents were alive? Is it kind of back to things like plumbing and heating and air conditioning people and data entry? Like, what do you think will be the trend of jobs that you don't need a college degree that will actually give you a sustainable life?
Oh, that's a really, I don't know that I'm like, that's a really tough question because it's like, I don't think, to be honest, so if you're talking about
seems like
the kinds of jobs that they could get, most jobs, they don't have to be plumbers. They're most like, even to go into investment banking, which a lot of people do. I don't know that going to undergrad helps you become like an investment banker. You learn so many of these jobs, it's on the job training or whatever.
Right.
But, besides investment banking, which is like a very small niche of people who do that.
Well, it seems like IT. Do you really need a 4-year degree to be building websites, to be, teaching people how to run their Facebook pages, monetizing their Facebook pages? Running companies' website, social media. To me, I'm like, if I had to do over again, I'd be completely fuck college. I'd be out doing a podcast show and then doing social media for all these companies as a consultant.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. I think, it's because of the federal involvement in college education that there's basically this oversupply of people who have these college educations, and which starts really from the artificial demand created by the loans being given, and it lowers the relative cost of college, or at least seemingly does. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what the long-term trend is. I would like to hope that there would be more opportunities for more diverse opportunities for people to just enter the workforce and sort of find their niche. And you could do even if you don't go to college, you could do a 6-month training program, for example, if you wanted to be an IT person out of high school.
I mean, even a police officer, to me, it'd be so much more valuable that you have to enter mandatory therapy for 8 months, then you can become a cop. What do you think? I'm dead serious. To me, it's does anyone care if a police officer has a 4-year or 2-year degree? No, but I'd like to make sure that you have had emotional, mental therapy, de-escalation therapy, mindfulness training. How about that for 2 years? Then you can become a police officer. To me, it's just everything is so mass produced, in this country. Just get this 4-year degree. It's no, okay, you want to be, an FBI agent? All right. How about some serious therapy first?
Yeah.
How about that?
It's it's sort
Therapy's
of
always my answer. No matter what people need, therapy.
It's a catch-22 because it's I can understand. I mean, I certainly think you're right. Most people shouldn't be going to college. They should be trying to do something else.
How do we get out of the cycle, though?
How do we get out of the cycle? With the credentialism, it's someone's got to I mean, it'll happen. I don't know how, and I don't know what. Who knows what jobs are going to be available in 10 years? I mean, it's so unpredictable.
Yeah, that's
given
true.
the rate of technological innovation. So I don't know. I mean, I don't really know, but...
Okay, well, this has been super insightful. If you want to follow Jeremy Lerman, if you have questions for him, you can follow him on his Facebook page. It's just Jeremy Lerman. And then people can ask you questions. They can message you and send it there. If you guys have any other follow-up, too, you can always email me, sarah@heyfrase.com. Or if you have a topic that you want to hear Jeremy and I discuss, please let us know. He's well-versed. And like I said, he has to argue all the sides and then just make me look smart. So please be sure to also subscribe to this podcast, Hey Frase, on iTunes. Hit 5 stars, leave me a review, and tell me what you like. Jeremy Lerman, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon. Love y'all. Thank you for listening to In the Mind of Frase. If you could do 2 things with me. Tell somebody about the Hey Frase podcast who's never heard of it. And also, if you could go to iTunes right now on your phone, hit subscribe and leave me a review. Hit 5 stars and tell me what you love. Bye, everybody. We'll see you next week.